sure who's listening right now.
We have to evacuate the airport because of a bomb threat or something. Welcome to the Moldovan city of Bălți. I'm the only Western tourist here, it feels like. It is the second city of Moldova after the capital, Chișinău. Yeah, we're in the Republic of Moldova, which is the poorest and least visited country in Europe. At least that's what all the other YouTubers rabbit on about. But is that true? To an extent, I suppose. It is quite a poor country and it suffered greatly after the collapse of the USSR. But I think that sort of misses the point a little bit. This country is hugely geopolitically important and I feel like that's something that's not really talked about too much. We're going to explore a little bit why that is. But to start off this journey, we're going to go back a few days to give some context to where we are and what's happening. But yeah, join me. Welcome to Moldavia. While future Oscar is in Chișinău, Moldova, we are here in the Romanian city of Iași, in the region of Romania known as Moldavia. The other two main historical regions in Romania are Wallachia, which is down south near the plains of Bucharest, and Transylvania, which is in the west beyond the Carpathian Mountains. While we are in a relatively insignificant part of Europe that no one really talks about much, this is a very important region. This land is stained with the blood of those who have fought over this region numerous times throughout its history. Iași, as the capital of historical Moldavia, has been looted several times by the Cossacks, the Poles, the Tatars, the Ottomans, and in more recent battles, Moldavia has become a battleground between spheres of influence over control of the Black Sea region between the Ottoman and the Russian empires. Today's Iași skyline is sort of characterized by these old commie blocks, all sort of built under the brutal rule of Nicolae Ceausescu. Quite fascinating to look at. I don't know if they're so good to live in. Mulțumesc. Iași may not be as economically prosperous as some of the other cities in Romania like Cluj or even Bucharest, and it may not have that sort of charm of the Transylvanian villages or towns, but it's got its own character about it and I quite like it. I mean, this skyline is sort of dominated by these commie blocks. There's the railway station down there. I mean, I wonder what life is like in a lot of these sort of apartments. As I was saying earlier, this region of Moldavia is not really talked about much, but in reality it's extremely historically important and it continues to be important today, and for the same reasons, which is that this area has been a battleground for spheres of influence. Modern Romania began here in 1859. Here is Union Square, and this commemorates the union of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. These two principalities were Ottoman vassals at the time, but laid the foundation for a united Romanian state, which eventually became its own kingdom. Bro's got a whole colony going. But look at it, it's beautiful, old Iași. I found a mosaic. How cool is that? Some stars and some factories and things, sort of symbolizing the industries of Romania. This building would have been built in the Ceausescu era under communist rule here. Socialist realism was the state art form, I guess, that was approved for use on buildings and public spaces. So you can see as well the cow, the bull I should say. You can see bits of wheat as well. That's kind of very socialist in its meaning. Eastern Bloc countries were often subject to collective farming practices. Wheat was often the symbol of like state agriculture, I guess. That EU flag just reminded me yesterday when I flew into Iași from Vienna. There was no passport controls because as of this year Romania has joined Schengen, but only partially. Doesn't apply to land borders, much to the chagrin of Romanians, I'm sure. But yeah, Romania's come a long way from the times of Ceausescu, who was the dictator here in Romania for over 3 decades and had a very brutal rule here. Ultimately, Ceausescu came to a brutal end during the Romanian Revolution in 1989 and was executed during the Russian-Turkish War of 1877-1878. Russia enlisted the help of the Romanians to fight against the Ottomans. The monument behind me is a monument to Romanian independence, which was established following the war. Romania allowed Russian troops to pass through its territory to defeat the Ottomans, and in return Russia granted Romania independence should they defeat them, and they did. So here we have a monument basically commemorating the event. You can see bas-relief of battle actions, I guess. You can see the soldiers there with their rifles, horses. Romania at that time consisted of just western half of Moldavia and Wallachia. The remaining parts of the country, namely Transylvania, was not acquired until the dissolution of Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918. Also acquired at the end of World War I was the eastern half of Moldavia, known as Bessarabia. Today, only the western half of Moldavia is in Romania, and the eastern part, Bessarabia, is divided between Moldova, Republic of Moldova, and Ukraine. So tomorrow we will take a trip to that eastern half of Moldavia, Bessarabia, into the Republic of Moldova, and we'll see what it's like today and also explain just how important this region still is and why it's not really talked about. Hey kitty. Good morning. Today we are going to try and catch a bus into Moldova. I've got to go to the bus station, got to get some money to pay for it. The ticket online said I can, well, it quoted the cost in Moldovan lei, but I don't actually know if they want me to pay in Moldovan lei or Romanian lei, because I am in Romania after all. So join me on my adventure to Moldova today. Alright, well, the currency exchange place didn't even have Moldovan lei anyway, so it's got Romanian ones. So it's gonna have to do, isn't it? Uno gogosi simple e una gogosi chocolate. Mă rog. Bun? Mulțumesc. Bus station. Alright, made it onto the right minibus. Also, I hope. Driver didn't accept payment. I think it's one of those situations where you pay at the end. I don't know, I didn't really understand. We'll pick up when we get close to the border. I asked him to just drop me off by this highway. Welcome to Moldova's second city, Bălți. Looks like Bălți, but apparently it's pronounced Bălți. Look at these apartment buildings. This is a microrayon called Dacia, named after the Romanian region. Let's see what we've got. Oh yeah. Old school. It's nice and cool in here. Ah, air conditioning. Thank God. We made it. Let's check out the bathroom. Oh, yeah, right. Fancy. Okay. Well, you know, pretty good. Yeah, the receptionist was speaking. I wasn't sure what language to speak because it's about 50-50, yeah, Russian and Romanian speaking. I nearly said Moldovan. She was sort of getting by with the broken English, and I couldn't really communicate too well. So I started speaking Russian. She's like, "Oh, you speak Russian?" I was like, "Yeah, a little bit." He's like, "Oh my God, thank God." Все хорошо, все удобно, да.
Спасибо.
Есть какой-нибудь хороший ресторан или бар?
Вот так и идите как отель по этой дороге.
Ага.
Чуть дальше будет Норок.
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 Хороший ресторан?
Молдавская, да.
Молдавский ресторан?
Молдавская, да.
Хорошо, спасибо вам. Check out the Zhiguli. You can see this is a mikrorayon. So this is an old Soviet style housing complex basically. The buildings are sort of built in sort of repeating patterns where there'd be sort of common spaces like this. You can see the playground in the middle. So all the people live up in these buildings and they all share these like common spaces sort of in between them all. Each mikrorayon would be a collection of these blocks that would function as their own like little city, I suppose. They would have maybe a school, pharmacy, some shops and everything like this, and these would be repeated throughout the suburbs, and they were designed so that they could be repeated basically across the entire Soviet Union. And you could basically like reproduce them, put them anywhere, regardless of sort of the climate or anything. So you end up with these very uniform looking cities, which might be typical what we might associate with the Soviet eras, because they planned these cities around these mikrorayons, which means like micro district, I suppose. Got some little shared spaces down there. That might be a school or something over there. These buildings here, you'll notice, are 5 stories. They were often built to 5 stories, especially in the 60s and 70s under Khrushchev's era, because 5 stories was the maximum allowed height before an elevator had to be installed in the building. So to make the buildings cheaper, they just built them to 5 stories, and they were known as Khrushchevkas after Nikita Khrushchev. So yeah, these are Khrushchevkas. Here you would have little stores like this, and they would be shared by all the people sort of who lived in this community. So I'm here in Bălți, and Bălți is sort of in the northern half of the country. It's about 50% Romanian speaking, 50% Russian speaking, although in terms of ethnicities it's less than 50% Russian. I think maybe like 20% Russian, 20% Ukrainian, something like that. But Moldova as a whole is primarily Romanian speaking. So given that Romania is right next door and Moldova is a Romanian-speaking country, why isn't Moldova part of Romania? Well, it's a good question, and it was actually part of Romania once upon a time. Prior to World War II, in the 20 years prior to that, it was. Much is known about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but what is less discussed is that in addition to Poland being divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and the Baltics being annexed by the Soviet Union, Moldavia, or Eastern Moldavia, Bessarabia, which is where we are, was to be granted to the Soviet Union. Of course, at that time it was part of Romania, so the USSR just gave an ultimatum to the country, basically saying, give us Bessarabia or we'll take Bessarabia. Romania, what could they do? You know? They couldn't really stand up to the Soviet Union at that time. So yeah, in 1940, Soviet troops marched into the capital, Chișinău, and Moldova became part of the Soviet Union, became its own constituent republic, actually. Of course, it briefly became under Romanian control again during Operation Barbarossa, but once the Germans and Romanians were defeated, then became part of the Soviet Union up until the whole Union's dissolution. The region had been a part of the Russian Empire prior to World War I, but in the chaos that followed post-war years in Eastern Europe, especially the Russian Civil War, Romania took advantage of the situation and claimed Bessarabia for itself, which Russia and later the Soviet Union never actually recognized as Romanian territory. And if you have a look at maps from the region at that time, you can see it was claimed by the Soviets. It was shown as disputed territory. It only took about 20 years, I guess, before they took it back again. But Moldova was subjected to Russification throughout the Soviet Union. The city I'm in, Bălți, it had some Russian population before that, but the percentage of Russian speakers went up over time due to these efforts. It was also subjected to collectivization and all the other wonderful things that the Soviet Union brought to its peripheries. But most of the people here, as I mentioned, are Romanian. But during the Soviet period, they were reclassified as Moldovans or Moldavians at the time. Moscow went to great lengths to try and convince the world, and Moldovan people probably, that Moldavian or Moldovan was its own language, separate from Romanian, which is not true. Basically all they did was change it to the Cyrillic script, maybe change a couple of words and they just called it a new language, but really it's Romanian. Hey papi. And then after the dissolution of the Union, Moldova, like all the other Union republics, became its own country. It's sort of left as a geopolitical oddity. There were talks about reunification with Romania around the early 90s, but Romania was focused on rebuilding itself following Ceausescu's brutal rule there. And so the cards just never really lined up, I suppose. The cards didn't line up, stars didn't line up, something like that. So yeah, they never reunited, and the situation between the two countries is friendly, but there's a great economic discrepancy between the two. Romania is quite a bit more well off, and of course part of the European Union as well. And so were Moldova to join Romania, I think Romania would have a task on its hands to try and build up this area so to the same economic level of economic development, I suppose. Hey puppy. And Moldova also has another problem on its hands, and that is the breakaway region of Transnistria, which we will talk about soon. But after the collapse of the USSR, Moldova was left quite economically depressed and really struggled and became one of the poorest countries in Europe because of that. It depended heavily on Moscow for oil and gas, for cheap oil and gas, which it now has to continue to pay, and unfortunately it's been used as a political tool, a bit of a weapon for Moscow to exploit and try and control Moldovan affairs. Moldova has traditionally been in the Russian sort of sphere of influence, to use that sort of realist IR speak, but they've been trying to break away from that, and ever since the election of Maia Sandu in 2020, she's been quite a pro-EU candidate. She's been trying to get the country up to standards for acceptance or admission into the European Union, which I believe they now have candidate status for as of last year or the year before, which has been met with resistance from Moscow, who have been trying to basically destabilize the country, prevent it from leaving its sphere of influence. For example, the Moscow Patriarch has tried to pressure the Moldovan Orthodox Church. Of course, disinformation and propaganda campaigns, which is not unique to Moldova, of course. Moldova has suffered at the hands of oligarchs who seized state assets in the country following the dissolution of the Union, much like they did in Russia and Ukraine. Many of these oligarchs are very politically active here in Moldova, so you can imagine the sort of destabilizing efforts that go on through that channel. One of which was a guy named Ilan Shor, who was a Moldovan oligarch. He actually was responsible for masterminding the theft of $1 billion from Moldovan banks, which is equivalent to 12% of the Moldovan GDP. Same old story. The country is just getting robbed from the inside and out. So you end up with a place that's sort of not doing so well, I guess, compared to other areas of Europe. It didn't start off on an easy footing. Another destabilizing technique is also bomb threats. I was in Chișinău 2 years ago, and I was flying out of the airport, and we all had to evacuate the airport terminal and stand on the runway for 3 hours because there was a hoax bomb threat, which apparently I learned afterwards was a regular occurrence around that time, especially since the start of the war in Ukraine.
Update, flight was supposed to have left almost 2 hours ago now. It's nearly 10:30.
But yeah, this is why Moldova is geopolitically important. It represents another country who's subjected to this tug of war between East and West. Moldova has aspirations to join the EU, and it seems pretty much on track to do that, but it's just a matter of when, I guess. It might take a long time. Who knows whether it will happen in the next 10 years, the next 20 years. Oh, you can see here, I guess this is a school or something, but you can see it was built obviously in the Soviet Union. Up the top, I don't know if you can read that. It says "Учиться, учиться и учиться," which means learn, learn, and learn. can see the old bas relief up the top there. This is what I was saying about the green tiles and the radial window grates. You'll see these all across the Soviet Union. And that's one of the crazy things about these microrayons and things like that, is that they were replicated across vast climates and time zones across a huge area. You'll see these same microrayons here in Moldova as you will in Uzbekistan or Siberia, you know. But I like it, old Bălți. It's pretty good. It's got a bit of character to it. More people should come to Moldova. It's the least visited country in Europe, and I think that's quite insulting. I saw a good tweet, I can't remember who it was by, but they were like, I think a lot about Moldova, and so should you. And you know what? I agree. And look at these beautiful blue painted doors and the green tiles. What more could you want, you know? Look at that bloke. He's actually full on running. Alright, let's try to find some dinner. I'm very hungry. I've done a lot of talking today. Noros. Okay, well, give it a go. Hopefully it's good. It's kind of interesting, fancy sort of. But the food's not that expensive. Like, main meals are only like, I don't know, $7 or $8 or something like that. What's piva?
Пиво?
Да.
Есть. Все стоимость в меню.
Да. This beer cost me $3. Oh, check that out. Bruschetta on the house. Alright, if you say so. Pretty good. Good morning, it is day 2 here in Bălți, Moldova. That's simple. Alright, got told off for filming in the marshrutka and I whacked my head getting out, which is about the 20th time I've done that. But here we are in the center of Bălți, and as you can see we've already got this epic Soviet monument or memorial here. You can see the 3 hammer and sickles sort of in a triangle there, and I think it's commemorating like Moldavian soldiers and other famous people from this region. Wow, our adventure in Bălți is off to a good start. The gardens are so well maintained. Look at that. We've come to this main square. I've got a lovely sort of fountain with a new building in the background, and I can't tell if that's abandoned or whether that's an under construction building. And way up the top, I don't know if you can see that, is there's actually 3 portraits. We've got Lenin, Engels and Marx, I believe. But yeah, they haven't really taken all this stuff down in Moldova, so if you want to see some Soviet relics, I mean, you're going to have a better shot here than you would in some of the Baltic states or Ukraine or anything like this. And it's crazy to think, for me at least, just how many lives were lost and how much suffering occurred under systems of government that were imagined by those 3 men. So many lives lost in Russia, all across the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, people were oppressed. And we still have these monuments to them that you can find just on city buildings. I mean, I guess it's difficult to take them down for a poor country that may not be the #1 priority. It's just mind-boggling to think about. I think there's a market over there. We're going to check it out. Mir, world, also means peace. You can buy all sorts of stuff, clothes, bags, Adidas, I'm sure it's all real. Fruits and things. Biscuits. Look at all those sweets. Oh my god. Oh, poor things. Just as we've walked out of the market as well, look what we've come across. Got the Eternal Flame and a T-34. I always find it interesting, war memorials in Moldova, because yes, it's celebrating the Second World War, but Moldova before the war was part of Romania and fought on the opposite side. I guess it's not too different from having war memorials in Germany or East Germany. Isn't it weird how globalized the world is. I'm staring at a Soviet tank and I'm listening to Katy Perry's Raw in a shop nearby. It is our last morning here in Bălți, Moldova. Today we're going to go to Chișinău, the capital. Let's go. Wow, this is the bus station, Gara Autovokzal. Look at this mosaic as well. The sign is just crumbling. Сколько времени осталось?
Вроде 10 минут, может быть даже 6 минут.
Хорошо, спасибо. Alright, made it to Chișinău bus station. All the buses to Ukraine over here. We've got Kiev and a couple of buses to Odessa. We're not going to go to Ukraine. До свидания. Alright, well, not the room to have if you're 6'1", but that's okay. Just gotta remember to duck. Bathroom, pretty good. Better than the last one I had here in Chișinău a couple of years ago. Window doesn't open. Big sad. Alright. Guys, look at this. What a mosaic. This is a school here. There's a sporting ground over there, and I guess this is the main building, but this mosaic has been preserved. Just incredible. The colors, the orange and then the red, like gradients and things. Very clever the way they do that. It's pretty amazing what you can find here if you just start looking for things. You start noticing things on drives and whatnot, and then you get rewarded with beautiful pieces of art like that. Just walking along this wall and I saw all this graffiti along here, and some of it's so nice, like "Правду говорить легко и приятно." I think it's easy and nice, or something to speak the truth. And then up here we have "С днем рождения," happy birthday. Very wholesome, just written on the wall. Probably an anniversary message here. 8 месяцев счастья. 8 months of happiness. Isn't that so nice? Two years ago I was sitting on one of those benches, people watching, and I'm back in the same place. Wow, that is so funny. I don't know if you can see up there, coat of arms of the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic. But yeah, there's your Lenin. And then just by the Lenin here, we've got this other sort of bas relief. You can see like the harvest and things. Moldova was quite a wheat producing member of the Union. Wow, look at that. Alright, I'm gonna get out of here. There's a very formal event that's going on. Just beside these epic Soviet apartment buildings here, I don't know if you can see like the mosaics and the metal window grates. I've just spotted through there that you can see two mosaics, one with the Moscow Tower and one with Misha for the Moscow Olympics. And Misha was the official mascot. So isn't that awesome? What a cool find. Let's see if I can get a better view of it around here. Maybe it's a school or something. Well, I won't film too much around here because it is a school, but yeah, you can see the two mosaics there. That's very awesome. I'm here in this beautiful park in Chișinău, and I can tell you a little bit more about Transnistria. So one of the biggest ways that Russia influences Moldovan politics is through its puppet state, Transnistria, in the east of the country. This is a primarily Russian-speaking pseudo-state that declared independence from Moldova in 1990 with the backing of Moscow. And up until this day it continues to function independently of Chișinău, but it's unrecognized by every country in the world. Yet it still has its own anthem, currency, flag, political institutions, government, police, everything like that. Its own football team even that once beat Real Madrid. And it's sort of kept all of its Soviet heritage in a way. It's Lenin statues, and it even has kept the hammer and sickle on its own coat of arms. And that is where most sort of YouTube explanations stop. People just sort of go there and they point at all the Lenins and the hammer and sickles and they go, whoa, little piece of the Soviet Union. But I feel like that misses the point of how significant the place is. So what the hell is going on? Like, how did this come into place? Well, administratively, after the Second World War, when Moldova or Bessarabia became its own Soviet republic, Moscow rearranged the internal borders of the republics and attached a small piece of what was Soviet Ukraine to the Moldavian Republic. This small strip of land by the Dnieper River was known in Romanian as Transnistria, meaning beyond the Dniestru River. In Russian and in English, the river's name is the Dniester, and in Russian, the name of this strip of land is the land by the Dniester River, or Pridnestrovia, which is what Transnistrians call themselves in Russian. And here you'll have my inner etymology nerd coming out, because the letters DN in the river name, Dniester, comes from the Indo-Iranian word Danu, meaning river. And it's actually the root word of a lot of rivers and places around that area of the world. So you have the Dnieper River, or the Dnipro River. You also have the Don River, the Donets, and of course the mighty Danube. These in turn have given rise to their own names, such as Donetsk, the city by the Donets River, and then the Donets Basin, or Donbass for short, comes from the same root word. Anyway, this little strip of land, during the Soviet era, many factories and industries were built there. Many skilled Russians were shipped in to operate these factories, leading to quite a mix of ethnicities in Transnistria. It became about 1/3 Russian, 1/3 Ukrainian, 1/3 Romanian or Moldovan, although primarily Russian speaking. So the left bank of the Dniester was very industrialized, and the right bank, or most of Bessarabia, was very agrarian. And you can even see that on the flag of Tiraspol, the capital of Transnistria. You have the sort of representation of the river with the industry on one side and agriculture on the other. And it continued in this arrangement up until the dissolution of the Union, or when it was about to be dissolved. And it became clear to the people of Moldova and the people of Transnistria that they would be part of a new Moldovan republic. But the problem was the people in Transnistria were not primarily Moldovan, and they didn't really like the idea of being part of a newly independent country. So in 1990 they declared themselves independent of the Moldovan Republic, which at that point was still part of the Soviet Union. They tried to declare their own Soviet Republic, the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic. It's a mouthful, isn't it? But then in 1991 the Union dissolved. Moldova did not have control over this strip of land, which had previously declared itself separate from Moldova. And so they tried to retake the land in 1992, but that didn't go very well. The Russian 14th Army, I believe, is stationed in Transnistria at the request of the Transnistrian government, and dealt a comprehensive defeat to the Moldovan army. And you can even see in Bender the bullet holes on the buildings from this war, which killed, I think, 700 odd people. And Transnistria maintained its weird sort of independence from Moldova. But the weird thing is Moscow never recognized it as a Soviet republic, and they never recognized it as an independent republic after the dissolution of the Union. So today we have the Moldovan Republic and we have the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic, the PMR, or Transnistria, in the east of the country that still remains outside the control of the Moldovan authorities. Transnistria, in a way, is Moldova's Moldova, so that's how you know the situation is complicated. And I actually visited Transnistria 2 years ago. I'm not going to go back there again, but I can show some old footage from this time. Basically, you approach the border, and there's 2 border checkpoints. There's the Moldovan one, and then there's the Transnistrian authorities. But of course, since Moldova doesn't recognize Transnistria, they can't make it an official border checkpoint. The Moldovans just have to do a random customs check before you enter this other region of Moldova. Transnistria, for their part, also realize that they're not recognized by anyone, so they can't stamp any passports because that would be vandalism in the passport. So they give you a little slip of paper, which is your visa. It's visa-free for every country, or every citizen that can visit Moldova can visit Transnistria without any extra permissions. They ask you how long you're going to be in the country for, and then they give you a little visa slip of paper that you have to hand back to them upon your exit. And a funny story, when I got on the marshrutka from Chișinău to Tiraspol, the capital of Transnistria, they asked me whether I was coming back the same way. And I said yes, like I was going to return back on the marshrutka. But they interpreted that to mean the same day, and I didn't realize that until I got back on the bus on the other side of the border and looked at my little visa stamp, or visa slip of paper, and it said only a transit visa, which was for 10 hours, and I had a hotel booking for 2 nights. So I had to yell out to the driver, wait, and then I showed him the problem, and he took me back into the customs building, and we explained the situation, and they gave me a new slip of paper. So off to a good start there. But at the border crossing, they were quite suspicious about foreigners, and in particular foreign journalists. They asked me if I was one and whether I had a camera with me, and I said, yeah, I have a camera, but I'm just a tourist. They're quite paranoid since the invasion of Ukraine about Ukrainian saboteurs and things like that. They're right on the Ukrainian border, but they're kind of isolated from their motherland, so to speak, their financier. But despite the flag, which they've kept from the Soviet days, and all the motifs and Lenin statues, Transnistria is not communist at all. It's far from it. It's more of a capitalist mafia state, to be honest. It's run pretty much by one company called Sharif, and they own gas stations, supermarkets, the stadium, pretty much the government itself. It's become a bit of just a place where money can be laundered and things like this. So they've cleaned up the drug trade in recent years, I believe, with the border checks. Particularly at the Ukrainian border, but it's pretty much a mafia state. It's an interesting place to go. I would recommend going once. I found it a little bit kitsch, having the whole Soviet theme going on. It felt like a little bit like Disneyland, but it is a bit of a geopolitical oddity, so if you're into that sort of thing, then go for it. Well, the biggest problem that Transnistria poses for Moldova is that it is a pro-Russian region in an otherwise pro-EU country. And Maya Sandu, the president of Moldova, who was elected in 2020, has been trying to push towards EU membership, and Transnistria is pretty much against that. So actually this October, in addition to the presidential election, there will be a referendum here in Moldova on whether joining the EU or aspiring to join the EU should be included as part of the Moldovan constitution. So that will be very interesting to see how that plays out. Transnistria is likely to vote against, as well as another autonomous region within Moldova called Gagauzia, which is home to an ethnically Turkic group called the Gagauz people. They speak their own language, but they're also quite pro-Russian, and they're headed by a pro-Moscow governor. Gagauzia is still under the control of Moldovan authorities. It's not like the same as Transnistria is, but still may present some issues as Moldova progresses towards EU membership. Well, you say, if Transnistria doesn't really have that many Moldovan people, why doesn't Moldova just give it up? Well, they could, and that may make things easier for EU membership, but historically countries have been very reluctant to voluntarily give up territory, especially territory that has valuable industries in it, like Transnistria does. However, there is hope. The EU has said Moldova could join the EU without Transnistria, which would be an interesting scenario. That would be somewhat modelled on the Cyprus situation. Cyprus is part of the EU, despite being half occupied by Turkey. And actually, the last time I was in Chișinău, I was handed a pamphlet explaining why Moldova should unite with Romania, which is an idea that has sort of lost traction over the years. But one of the benefits it said on the pamphlet anyway was that it would give instant EU access. Now I don't know how true that would actually be, but I found that was like an interesting thing that was touted in a way. And it actually did mention in that pamphlet the Cyprus analogy, so I thought that was interesting as well. I don't know how similar the situation would be in practice, or whether that could even work, but I thought it was an interesting analogy nonetheless. So yeah, that's the situation in Transnistria, and I feel like it's not really talked about. So yeah, if you end up visiting Transnistria, you can keep a little bit of the currency as a souvenir. It's a currency that can't be exchanged anywhere else in the world. You sort of have to spend it all while you're there, or that's it. So yeah, that's the situation in Moldova. Be interesting to see what the October elections look like. Disinformation campaigns will probably be ramped up in the lead up to those. But yeah, at the moment I think Moldova is a candidate country to join the EU, and I think it's a very fascinating place. Not a lot of people visit it, and I think they should. So that's it really for my time here in Moldova. Come and visit Europe's least visited country. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.